We are studying the Gospel of Mark. Who was Mark anyway? In Greek, his name was written like this, Marcos. He was born with the given name John Mark. He was a cousin of the man the apostles called Barnabas, which translated means son of encouragement. But Mark himself is mentioned only a few times in the New Testament. In Acts, John Mark is identified as the young man in whose parents' home the first church of Jerusalem met. That means Mark grew up as a member of a well-established urban family. He knew all the movers and shakers of the early church. His family surely helped to finance the first mission endeavors, for young John Mark accompanied Paul and Barnabas on their missionary journey together. At one point, though, Mark's commitment was questioned by Paul. In fact, Paul decided to not bring Mark on his second missionary journey. After some time had passed, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let's go back and visit the brothers in every town where we have preached the message of the Lord and see how they're doing." Barnabas wanted to take along John Mark, but Paul did not think it appropriate to take along this man who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone on with them to the work. There was such a sharp disagreement that they parted company, and Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed off to Cyprus. Then Paul chose Silas and departed after being commended to the grace of the Lord by the brothers. It's interesting how the Lord works. He used a sharp disagreement between Paul and Barnabas to double the number of missionaries out in the field. Eventually, though, Paul's frustration with Mark evaporated. Mark proved himself capable and so dedicated in the mission field that years later, while Paul was imprisoned in Rome, he wrote asking Timothy to come visit him and said, "Bring Mark with you, for he is useful to me in the ministry." So in the end, Paul found Mark useful to him in the ministry. He wasn't the only one. Obviously, so did Barnabas. Peter also found Mark quite useful in the ministry. In fact, Peter once went so far as to refer to Mark as "my son," something Peter said of no one else. An early church historian named Eusebius noted that Mark accompanied Peter on many of his missionary journeys, and that Mark recorded the stories Peter used in his preaching. Mark then wrote his gospel a mere 20 years or so after the actual events occurred, well within the lifetimes of eyewitnesses. Mark recorded details from those who were there and finished his gospel a decade or two earlier than the other gospel writers. Listen, I think it's important that we who are believers today understand that our faith is rooted in historical fact. Jewish scholars do not deny that Jesus once lived and walked this earth, nor do even the greatest critics of the Christian faith. All historians agree that Jesus ministered in Palestine in the 3rd decade of the 1st century. Secular researchers help us understand the times and the mores and the traditions of the era. They enable us to better understand what the message of the gospel meant to those who first heard it. We who are alive today certainly have a different worldview than those living when Jesus walked this earth. And yet, his act of self-sacrifice, permitting himself to be nailed to a cross and dying in agony to pay the penalty for our sin, well, that's just as enduring today as when it was first preached by the likes of Peter and Paul and Barnabas and James and John and all the others. Today we pick up the story in Mark chapter 1. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, went out, and made his way to a deserted place. And he was praying there. Simon and his companions went searching for him. They found him and said, "Everyone's looking for you." And he said to them, "Let's go on to the neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come." So he went into all of Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. I enjoy reading Mark's gospel because he always focuses on what Jesus does. What did Jesus do first thing in the morning? Here's the Son of God, all-powerful, able to call 10,000 angels to assist him if needed. And yet, first thing in the morning, what does Jesus do? He goes off by himself to pray. Finding time to pray is not always easy. In modern times, our busy lives make it difficult, and yet we Christians understand that communicating with God is essential. Jesus, who was the Son of God, did it. Don't you think we should too? Jesus set the example for us. And so, following his example, we must make time to break away from others and visit with our Father in heaven. Whatever it takes, get alone with the Lord. Even if it means rising early before the rest of the family is up. Mark tells how when Peter and the others awaken and discover Jesus is not with them, they go looking for him. I can think of no better example you can set for your children or your grandchildren than to have them awaken in the morning and discover that you are not in your bed. Where's Mom? Where's Grandpa? So they go looking for you. And they find you perhaps out on the back porch in the brisk morning air, or on that comfortable recliner in the living room with your feet up, and there's a Bible in your lap, and your head is bowed, and you are praying. What's the unspoken message? What vital message are you conveying to your children or your grandchildren when they find you praying? That's the message Jesus conveyed to his disciples when they found him kneeling, fingers laced, praying to his Father. Perhaps your children or grandchildren will say to you, as Peter said to Jesus, "Everyone is looking for you." You needn't even respond to that. Your message has been conveyed. Jesus didn't respond. Instead, he says, "Let's go to the neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. That is why I have come." In prayer, Jesus decided it was time to continue ministering elsewhere. You'll find that God implants new ideas in your mind too when you pray. Prayer focuses our minds. God conveys his will to us when we pray. In prayer, Jesus came to a decision. He understood what he should do next. Prayer also energized Jesus. He was prepped and ready to minister, even though he arose long before Peter and the others. Jesus said, "Let's go. Let's go to the neighboring villages." It's sad that so many Christians never discover the value of prayer. God has promised to direct your life, Christian. He has promised to guide you in the paths of righteousness. And yet, if you fail to communicate with God in prayer, how can he do for you what he did for Jesus? Spending time alone with the Lord should be your daily routine. And those who pray daily discover that they have more energy to minister, plus God provides them direction. He often conveys his plans to you in prayer. In prayer, you discover what he wants you to do next. Jesus finished praying that morning and said, "Let's go on to the neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come." Why did Jesus come? What did he come to do? He came to preach. You know, we think of preaching as something someone at the pulpit does with his mouth. But coming to preach meant so much more to Jesus. Jesus preached with his life. He taught with the things he did. He demonstrated God's love not just with words, but with his actions. Jesus was in Capernaum at the time. Capernaum is a beautiful area, a region of piney woods located on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. He spent the night in Peter and Andrew's parents' house. James and John were with them. And that evening, everyone in town showed up. Mark tells us the whole city gathered at his door. And he healed many who were ill with various diseases and cast out many demons. And yet next morning, Jesus was the first to rise, and while it was still dark, he left the house and went away to a secluded place, and he prayed to his Father. Then a man with a serious skin disease came to him and on his knees begged him, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him. "I am willing," he told him, "be made clean." Immediately, the disease left him and he was healed. Most translations of the Bible identify that serious skin disease as leprosy. Leprosy today is also called Hansen's disease. It is an infection caused by bacteria that can lead to damaged nerves, lungs, skin, and eyes. There was no cure for it in Jesus' day. If you got it, you died from it. Today, thank God, there is an effective treatment, a 3-drug combination of antibiotics. It's highly effective and easy to administer, so in modern times, leprosy is less common, but it's still highly feared. Leprosy is spread when healthy humans come into contact with those who have the disease. This man begged Jesus, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." And just look at what happens next. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him. As I said, leprosy is spread when healthy people come into contact with those who are infected with the disease. And everyone knew that in Jesus' day. Jesus certainly knew it. Nevertheless, he reached out his hand and touched the man with leprosy. He was so moved with compassion that he risked his own health. Why? What filled Jesus with compassion for this man? Well, he certainly knew this contagion was a death sentence for him. It meant that this man would be ostracized from society. More than 1,000 years earlier, God gave this direction to Moses. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, "When someone has on the skin of his body a swelling or a scab or a bright spot, and it becomes an infection of leprosy on the skin of his body, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priests. The priest shall look at the infected area on the skin of the body, and if the hair in the infection is turned white, and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is an infection of leprosy. When the priest has looked at him, he shall pronounce him unclean." To be pronounced unclean, even in Jesus' day, meant that you were not allowed to enter the marketplace or the temple or anywhere else where people gathered. It meant that you were unfit to participate in any social activity. It meant spending the rest of your life living in colonies with other lepers. If you have leprosy and it goes untreated, your skin whitens as it dies, you lose fingers and toes, your nose flattens as the cartilage within is destroyed, your ears droop or fall off, and an early death is inevitable. People were so afraid of contracting the disease that it was common practice to stone lepers. If they came near, people hurled rocks at them to keep them at a safe distance. And so it's no wonder that Jesus, being who he was and knowing what lay ahead for this man, should look upon him with compassion. But what is implied when the man with leprosy says, "If you are willing, you can make me clean"? If you are willing. The implication is that this man knows Jesus has the power to heal him. Perhaps he's seen Jesus heal others or drive demons from their bodies. So one thing and only one thing could prevent this leprous man from being completely healed, and that would be if Jesus were not willing. And so he says, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." There was no other cure. There was no other hope. Should Jesus be unwilling, the man with leprosy would be unable to embrace his wife and children ever again. He would never be permitted to provide for them. He could not watch his kids mature into young men and women. He'd not be there for their high school graduation. He'd miss their wedding days. He'd never be able to kneel beside his grandchildren and embrace them, or love them, or tickle them, or even buy them a new bicycle for their birthday. All of that would be denied to him. All that would be enjoyable in life would be denied him if Jesus were unwilling. And I believe that Jesus, seeing this, took it all in, as it were, in one sweeping vision of hopelessness. And, moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him. "I am willing," he told him, "be made clean." Immediately the disease left him and he was healed. You know, Jesus said this is what he came to do, to preach. What better way to preach the love of God than to heal a man with leprosy? That's the same compassion that drove Jesus to the cross for you and me. This compassion enabled the Son of God to permit himself to be whipped, mocked, slapped, spit upon, and then forced to carry that emblem of shame through the streets of Jerusalem. The compassion Jesus felt for the man with leprosy, he felt for you, my friend, and for me. We were condemned to die not from an illness, but for our own sinfulness. We were slated to be ostracized from family and friends and from God Himself for all eternity. Were it not for the compassion of Jesus Christ, hell was our destiny. And so that man with leprosy, in a sense, spoke for all of us when he said, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Thank God Jesus was willing. With compassion, Jesus died on the cross. With compassion, He rose from the grave. With compassion, He saved us from the most horrific separation of them all. It's called eternal death. Eternal separation from the loving God who created us. It is Jesus' compassion for us that enables you and me and all those who are born again to live together with Him forever in heaven. And so it's no surprise to me that Jesus was moved to compassion for this man, or that He willingly reached out His hand and laid it upon his leprous, white, and decaying skin and exposed Himself to the disease. And it's no surprise to me that Jesus said, "I am willing, be made clean." Immediately the disease left him and he was healed. Then Jesus sternly warned him and sent him away at once, telling him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest and offer what Moses prescribed for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Since Jesus was the Messiah, why wouldn't He want the man He had just healed to go tell others about it? Well, Jesus wasn't there to gain popularity. We know from other passages of Scripture that Jesus knew intuitively that people would see His power and recognize the political value of it. They would seize Him and make Him king. He wasn't there for that, not that time. That comes with His second coming. Instead, Jesus instructed this man to obey the law of Moses. Those laws directed the man to go to a priest, confirm his healing, and offer the appropriate sacrifice. It was the only way this man could return to society, because until a priest said it was so, it wasn't so. This man needed a priest to declare him clean and free from the disease. So Jesus told him, "See that you say nothing about this, but go and show yourself to a priest." Did he listen and obey? Instead, he went out and began to proclaim it widely, to spread the news, with the result that Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but He was out in deserted places, and they would come to Him from everywhere. The man did not do as he was told, but you know what? I find it hard to blame him. If I had an incurable illness suddenly healed by Jesus, I doubt I could keep quiet about it either. But now the cat was out of the bag, so to speak. The man told others what Jesus did for him, and, well, it spread like wildfire. It is important that we remember that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Our God hasn't changed. Someone told me recently that they heard a preacher declare that the age of miracles is over. That teaching comes from the concept of dispensationalism. That is, the idea that God deals with humanity differently today in this dispensation than He did in Jesus' day. Therefore, they believe the age of miracles has passed. But miracles still happen every day. Maybe we don't always think of them as miracles. Today you can heal leprosy with a simple dose of antibiotics, but to me, it's still a miracle. Let's not limit God's ability to interact with His creation in any way He sees fit. Which is the greater miracle? That Jesus healed one leprous man with a single touch, or that millions have been healed because God revealed to someone somewhere the concept of antibiotics and then directed researchers to find just the right combination of antibiotics to kill the bacteria that causes leprosy? How can anyone say that miracles do not happen? We live in an age when people walk on the moon and cross the ocean in a matter of hours. And what about this miracle? We can talk to and even see others instantaneously with one of those devices. Call it technology if you wish, but to me, that's God at work. For who gave man the knowledge to accomplish such incredible things? Oh yes, we live in an age of miracles. And beyond even what has been revealed to us in the form of new medications and technology, beyond even that, our God continues to work miracles that are inexplicable and baffle physicians. People continue to be miraculously healed of their diseases. The internet abounds with stories of people who were informed by doctors that they had some terminal illness and would soon die, but who not only survived, but are thriving decades later. So yes, we live in an age of miracles. Our God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And like the man who was healed of leprosy, I just can't keep quiet about Jesus. Thank you for studying God's Word with me today. Lord willing, I'll see you next week.